above me, and I stepped aside just before the hot glass hit the floor right where I was standing. My Michael Jackson moment. I guess I guess we can go ahead and.
Yep. You're good to drop the mask if you want to.
I think we're far enough apart. I think we're okay.
Yeah. I figure about 20, 25 feet.
We're probably okay.
Is reasonable. I do the best that I can with that.
Yeah, this is a nice little setup.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said, coming from somebody who gets it, it means a lot.
Well, it's an honor to be on the same stage as Jenny Johnson and Stick and Mark Stoffel and all these folks over the years.
It is a nicely shared stage.
Hey,
a lot
that
of good
last
memory.
night was great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Wow, we were watching that and listening. It was so enjoyable.
Stick was a hoot to host that with. He's a mix of the self-consciousness sets off the talent, right? There's just something about that with folks who, are good and then, concerned, if that makes sense.
Well, Monica started streaming it, and I'm like, what is that? That's beautiful. And she explained, I'm like, oh, yeah. I'd seen that this was coming up. I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. And I got to tell you, it's a wonderful way to stay connected in this really weird time that we're living in.
Well, and it's funny, too, adding in kind of like the live conversation components to it has that has like really livened up the show. Like it's evolved bit by bit, over the course of doing this, from when Mr. Number First, Tim Crosby, did our first one, and it was just I've literally never done sound, lights, or anything like that before. This is all very new to me. I was always a person comfortable on stage, but never behind the board. So having evolved it to the point now where it can feel like a live show because you are in a performance with all of your friends, seeing what they have to say, hearing the words read back to you. It's that interactive media that helps to bridge that gap between the digital and the physical spaces.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to be in a live production, like when we're at the Capitol doing the governor's state of the state and budget messages and things like that, because you have a little microphone on you here, you have an IFB, and you've got your floor director and all that, and you've got 4 people on cameras, 6 people in the truck, and another 20 people around the state pulling down what you're doing, and there's all the graphics and all the stuff that goes into it, and it's just this really interesting organic whole that you're in. And then it's also the personal relationship you have with your fellow reporters and the politicians, in my case, at least in that one show I do. It's really interesting because you get to know them over time. You know where their hot buttons are, you know where their soft spots are, and all that. And it's fun being able to pull it together. And it's nice, at least I hope, for the technical people, that I've been on the other side of it, pulling it together as a producer. So I don't paint them into, I try very carefully to be watching the time and all the rundowns and stuff, so that I don't paint them into a corner and, blow up the TV schedules for 10 PBS stations across the state. But it's it's a thrill, and it's really a special thing to be able to do it. So anyway.
Well, and it's a thrill and a special thing to be doing episode number 24 with a legendary guest in the world of broadcasting in the state of Illinois, and probably to so many people around the country, around the globe, who have gotten to interact with him over the many years that he's been engaged with this. We'll get to that point here shortly, but welcoming my guest to WTF Carbondale episode 24, Mr. Jak Tichenor, where we're talking to interesting people about their interesting lives, tying it all together with this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois, and really, Jak, with all of the stories. Like, because it's not, you don't just live stories, right? A lot of us and a lot of folks live stories, right? But you are cataloging things and creating an entire segment of history that is referenceable.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Nathan, for having me. First of all, I really appreciate it and the work that you're doing. And thanks. I feel like I've been really lucky in a lot of my career to sort of be there when the first draft of history is being written, as Jim Lehrer, the legendary newscaster from the McNeil Lehrer news report, said over the years. I've been lucky to, in many ways, be able to have a career here in my own backyard. Mm-hmm. I'm from Metropolis, about 60 miles, depending on how you drive, down to the Ohio River, just across from Paducah, Kentucky, and to have most of my professional career here at SIU, and to have been a part of a really special place in the life of media in the United States and the world in many respects. This is kind of one of the magic touchstones of our business here at SIU, because of the reputation of the school and the thousands of people who have come through it over the years as students, as faculty and staff. It's a lovely place, and I'm just so deeply grateful to so many people for the experience I've had here.
Oh, that's beautiful. It really is, because it's again, legacy is important in any higher education setting, but it's like there's a difference between the legacy of pomp and circumstance, right, and the legacy of network or the legacy of action. And it's like in a scrappy little state school like SIU, it's like our legacy is action, not just that.
Oh, I think that's a good point, because I was talking to someone the other day, and we were kind of going over the whole history of WSIU and all that. And I said, well, it really starts back in 1948 when Dwight Morris came here. Dwight Morris came here as a young academic professional, administrative professional, and he was starting to lay the building blocks for this communications enterprise that exists to this very day. And he was starting to sign up for federal communications licenses for radio and television in the early 1950s. The first radio station, WSIU Radio, didn't go on until 1958, but they were already applying for the licenses for TV, all these things. They were bringing in faculty members like Buren Robbins from outside to start really building the foundation for this thing. And, I've been able to, over the years, talk to people who were there at the very beginning, and it's so cool because even as early as, I think, 1954, 1955, which is the year of my birth, students in the radio TV program were starting to do radio productions that they were mailed out, they were on these reel-to-reel tapes, this very flimsy medium back in the day. They were sending them out to commercial radio stations even before we had our own license here. And so the roots go back to the late 1940s, and here we are in 2020, and so much has happened over the years. This is just such a special place. You see the growth of SIU over the years, and you see all the things that this university and its radio and TV stations and media channels have meant to the region, the state, and the country and the world. It's really a special place to be.
Well, and the decline as well, while some folks may not find a silver lining, that to me, especially when we're in a massive media transition as a world, right? Where the internet and applications and smartphones as media devices have completely changed the way in which we communicate, to really have a ground up rebuild of a communications facility, a communication related identity. Like, and I've been pitching this to everybody from executive type folks to students, being like, the intersection of everything that you do is media.
Yeah. What's really interesting about it is, we were talking right before we started this about when I started in the business was right around 1970, 71, and everything was analog at the time. So, I started out as a DJ in my hometown of Metropolis, a little AM station, WMOK, 1,000-watt daytime station. And everything in that station in 1970, 71 dated back to the 1940s equipment-wise. So you had turntables, you were playing records, you had reel-to-reel tapes and all that kind of stuff, and lots of live copy. And there was kind of this infrastructure thing there. So let's go forward. You have TV studios, you have master controls, you have all these different huge infrastructures that allowed you to talk to mass audiences. Now you can just reach in your pocket, turn on the phone, and you can do so much. You can do even more than we could do back in the day. And it's really fascinating to me to see how we've grown with that over the years.
Yeah.
The business has definitely changed. Not so many mom and pop radio and TV stations anymore because of the way the industry was deregulated starting back in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, and then forward through the Clinton years and all that. But then you have this, the way that the internet, the web, personal devices like we all have now, and social media, we can reach out to so many different audiences. It's kind of like we're swimming in this sea of media, and we're always trying to, keep track of where we are in it. It's definitely been a sea change over my career that's going on 50 years now. But it's just fascinating to see the students who come in at SIU and who bring all this enthusiasm and intelligence and imagination and creativity to what they're doing, and to see how these programs evolve over the years. It's absolutely fascinating to be a little bit of a part of it.
What the change in media policy starting in the 80s, was it the fairness doctrine that was like the first thing that went? And okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
No. The fairness doctrine basically was a part of FCC regulations that said you have to give equal time to all parts of discussion on a controversial issue, and that went away. Then there was the relaxation or the end of the policies where you couldn't have more than one broadcast media outlet in a town, and there were some that were grandfathered into that. And it's interesting when I look at the market I was in for about 7 years in the Paducah, Kentucky area, when I was working my way through college. There were, there were 3 commercial radio stations in Paducah. Then you had WPSD, and you had the Paducah Sun. Then you have, of course, WSIL and KFVS. But all of those things competed to do news. I kind of migrated into news in, I think it was 1979. Kind of migrated over to the news and information side of the spectrum. But we were all competitors at the time, and there was fierce competition between the commercial radio stations especially. And now a lot of those places are all under one roof. You look at all the markets around the country, and a lot of the stations that would have all been, tooth and nail against each other, that distinction's not there anymore. You might have 5 radio stations in one building Some of them are on little automation clocks. There's some live assist. There's some live folks that are doing stuff. It has definitely changed over the years. But at the same time, you have this swing to personal media now and social media, which allows so many outlets for people to get their point of view out there and share their passions. It's very interesting to see it.
No, it's share their passions is a way of phrasing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think that we would be in a completely different media landscape, even getting into the personalization of social media, if it wasn't for the change in media policy over the years in the 80s and 90s that brought us here? Like,
Yeah, the regulatory thing is a big part of it, but the business model's changed too. Just think about the technology. When I started in radio in 1970, I think it was December when I first walked into our hometown radio station. As I say, everything was concentrated, right there, and so for every minute that radio station was on the air, somebody had to be there to attend to it. So there was a human relations or human resources component to it that's very different than today. Most of today's radio stations are set up on computer programs. So you sit down, you create the log, all of your sources come in through an IP address, and you set the log up weeks in advance in some cases for some stations. And so you don't have to pay for a person to be sitting there 24/7. If you had a live AM/FM combo, like we used to call it, somebody had to be there in both control rooms 24/7 if you were that kind of station. Well, the business models today with content like music, information programming, that really has completely changed the whole situation. So the business model has changed over the years, as well as the regulatory landscape. One of the things I did a while back was a First Amendment class for some students at John A. Logan College, and I kind of went back and walked myself through it to try to make sense to 19s and 20-year-olds in the room. And it's like, well, there was at the local station there was somebody who did news. They went to the city council meeting, they went to the county board meeting, they went to the courthouse, they went to the police station, or they called we had our police rounds every morning and every afternoon to find out, how things were going with accidents and public safety concerns and stuff like that.
I gotta say, it's so funny that you bring up that particular point, because I saw a post by TV3 earlier today on Facebook that was a news post about a traffic, maybe it was like a car chase or something that occurred in Heron, and all they did was pull it straight from Heron Crime Unit something or other, the police department's Facebook page,
right,
and just essentially took that information and reshared it. Like, there was no street beat relationship, like
there was no intermediary.
Just,
That's true. That's been a big change, because when I was working early morning news, what you would do is, long before you signed on, about an hour to, your first newscast might be at 6:06, right after CBS News. So you're in the building at 5 o'clock, ripping the wires and looking at stuff, and then, probably, in my case, working on notes and, pulling sound bites from the meeting I'd covered the night before, whether it was Paducah City Council or whatever. There was a lot more interaction with the news sources than there is today, and I think we've lost something with that.
Yep.
It's very efficient, though. Like you said, I know the story you're talking about with the police chase, and this is what they put out there, and it's very similar to, looks exactly the same way we used to get it back 40, almost 50 years ago. But the actual experience of going to the courthouse covering a murder trial or going to federal court to cover a civil case or a criminal case, covering the local school board, the local park district, the city council meeting, all of those things, there's the broadcast side of that. There's also the newspaper side of that, that we've seen so much pullback over the years because of the changing media landscape. To me, that's a real downside.
Yep.
Because you need that kind of personal attention to all of these things as much as you can, I think, to live in a democracy and to have the information that you need to make a decision as, an informed voter, an informed citizen. One of my professors said early in the day, you're not out there to be a star or anything. You're there to try to pull together as much information about the day's news as you can from your vantage point as an objective reporter, and distill it so that the person watching at home who has had a full day of family activities and work and all that stuff, so that they can get an idea of what happened, and so they can make informed decisions. And that, to me, has been one of the downsides as, the media landscape has changed over the years, because we just don't see as much of that. So there's not as much, filtering's not the word I'm looking for, but there's not as much attention to the day-to-day activities of government and policy and politics with professional observers.
Well, and uncovering is to me another component of it, right? That in having a large and capable base of reporters, that right now it's self-reporting, right? What gets picked up is almost like the wire from the source, which is not always the most credible source, right? There may be something there. Now, most of the time, probably not. Like with the Heron release, right? There's probably not a bunch more to that story beyond what they put out there.
Probably not a whole lot there. But
if there was something related to something internally that was going on, and they provided their own messaging, but there wasn't actual investigation into that.
Let me kind of jump ahead to
please.
One of the areas that's very dear to me, and that's political coverage. When I first started covering the Illinois State House in the late 1980s, I was still a radio person at the time, but I was going up there because so much of what happens in Springfield translates into important everyday decisions for the folks around this area. I mean, we're so heavily connected to what happens in the Capitol, whether it's budgetary or policy-wise. We have so many state facilities here, so many state workers here. I realized early on that was important to have a good sense of that. But when I first came to the Capitol, the newsroom was wasn't the second floor, wasn't the third floor. It was like the mezzanine level. It was a little, kind of squished in between there in the west wing of the place. Well, there were like 45 full-time reporters there, okay, in the Legislative Correspondents Association. And the place was, on a session day when the General Assembly was there, the place was packed with people. There were TV reporting crews from Chicago, Springfield, Champaign, Rockford, Quincy, Carbondale. Everybody was there. It was just this big beehive of activity. Fast forward now to the fact that a lot of the large commercial stations and the newspapers have pulled way back from that. There's not nearly the number of there's not the number of bureaus in the Capitol, for example, to go around and ask for other opinions, get other ideas, get other interpretations about the day's news. And that's really, to me, that's troubling. I would like to sit down and read, 6 or 7 different news sources for the day about what's going on at the Capitol. Even on days when I'm not there, I mean, my reading list is, I'm still a voracious consumer of news. But as I look back over it over the last 10 years or so, it's so narrowed to what it used to be. There's still great work being done by folks at the Capitol, no question about that. But there's not as many of them, and they don't have as many local interpretations of how this translates down to, what happens on the House floor, on the Senate floor, or the governor's office on the second floor. It doesn't. There's not the diversity of reporting that there once was, and that's where I think there's a problem. I think public media is doing a good job on that with the Illinois Public Radio News Desk. We have at WSIU, we do a weekly Capitol View show on the TV side with folks who are there covering the stuff every day. Certainly, it's been a challenge during COVID, no question about that. We do a lot of it by remote, but I still think we need more people on the ground, whether it's City Hall, the county courthouse, or the Illinois General Assembly. I still think you need more and more information. There's an old saying that sunshine is the best disinfectant. I think that goes back to Paul Simon, at least in one form or another, because he was the author of the first Public Meetings Act in the state. So I think the more of that, the better. The reality is that, the commercial pressures especially have been such on the marketplace that it's really hard for local stations and local newspapers, and that's not just locally, that's all over the state, that's all over the United States, to actually have that up-close personal contact with the lawmakers and the policymakers.
What do you think about some of the trend towards media outlets going to a nonprofit model versus a commercial for-profit model? I mean, do you see any? I mean, especially coming from WSIU, which is a little different because it's still public broadcasting funded, and you've got the school backing. You still have to have the donor base. There are lots of components that come into play there. But I've talked to some of my modern media folks in all sorts of industries. Like, hey, if you feel like it's not working out in this way, is there a way to go into a nonprofit model where you see people who simply value the information that you provide you some sort of direct sustenance as an audience?
I think you might be talking about the Capitol News Bureau that's feeding a lot of the newspapers now for through grants through the Illinois Press Association. Okay. So there are ways that that's being addressed, and I think that's an especially good model where you have the resources of all the newspaper entities around the state that are chipping in to fund that. They're doing really good work there. Public broadcasting has filled a lot of those niches, if you will, over the years, as commercial radio and TV stations have kind of pulled back from that because of the way they do business. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation of how the business has evolved. Public media have stepped forward across the United States to kind of bridge that gap, and I think that's a real area for us to grow in public media. That's a real area where we can make a difference. And on our end, the stations, the public radio and TV stations, are looking at a lot of collaborative models. When you hear the newscast, let's say in the morning on our station, it's coming from DeKalb, but it's coming from all the stations in the state. People are editing, they're working, they're reporting. In addition to the Public Radio News Bureau at the Capitol, there's this kind of synergistic thing that's going on out there, and I think that I think we're doing a good job on that. We need to move more into that on the TV side. A lot of resources when you do that. But we're looking at the opportunities and the challenges there.
That's cool. I dig that. I mean, I hadn't even thought about the collaborative model aspect as well. Like what can be achieved when everybody's just kind of putting their resources into a pool and trying to draw from it on the other end.
Well, we've been doing that for a long time, particularly on the public radio side. There's been a bureau there. I'm trying to think. This actually probably predates me, but I know that there's a strong on-the-ground reporting program there at the Capitol. But as things have moved along over the years, it's not just the Capitol. We need to know what's going on in Chicago. We need to know what's going on in Springfield. We need to know what's going on in the Carbondale area, Champaign, Urbana, Western Illinois, so on and so forth. So the more that you can tie these things together and say, well, all right, what's the impact of having a budget impasse for over 2 years at the State House level? How's that trickling down to the delivery of social service programs, the social safety net programs in the state? How's that impacting on higher education, where universities didn't really have a budget beyond their tuition income for over 2 years? All of these things, if you can pull it together with a model like that, where folks are working together to give you a context or a lens from which to view the whole thing, I think that's very, very important.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth as it were. I mean, and being able to synthesize it for individual locations and markets, and it just boils down into, okay, here's a broad impact, here's a narrow impact, and here is what Joe Smith in this particular town, be it big or small, need to be able to digest. And I think that goes back to your original point of like, well, what was your job as a newsman? And that was to synthesize this content into bites that people can digest and use it to better their world around them day to day.
Well, one of the things I thought about, and it may sound kind of corny or I don't know, maybe Pollyannish or whatever, but I used to think, when I'm going to the Capitol to cover a complicated issue about what's going on there, how do I do that in such a way, or tell the story in such a way that anyone who's watching the program or listening to the program can understand it, no matter what their background is. And that's always been one of the challenges for me personally, is to, well, how can I explain this to my aunt, or someone in my family or a friend?
Yeah.
How do I boil that down to make sense of it? And over the years, that's been really one of the most interesting things, is to be there as these things are happening. And a lot of it's relationships with the individual lawmakers, the governors over the years, and the policymakers, to try to to tease these things out, from their various perspectives. That's been one of the real challenges for me, is to try to boil all these things down.
So one of the things that I'm interested in from a politics standpoint is, you're talking about having all these personal relationships and kind of where that would yield its value in reporting. I'm sure plenty of people know the bigger names, the Barack Obamas and the Paul Simons and whatnot. But is there anybody that stands out in your mind that was kind of a lower profile politician that you really just kind of clicked with and felt like you got a lot out of in your relationship over the years of reporting from the Capitol?
That's a good question. There are a lot of folks who come to mind, but I now remember the thread where I was going.
All right, yeah, follow through on that one.
I know where the thread is. The thing that that became clear to me over the years was not so much our differences from, let's say, southern Illinois to Chicago to the collar counties or western Illinois or wherever, but was the commonality of the issues that faced everyday people in the state. And you get a sense of where the political fault lines are, how the city of Chicago might view a certain issue with teachers' unions, for one example, to how southern and central Illinois feel about gun control, and how that issue would be viewed in Chicago. Yeah, there are things like that where, yes, there are clear fault lines. But when it comes to things like access to medical care, access to quality preschool education, all of those things, those issues don't really have a whole lot of geographical boundaries on them. You get to see how the whole thing functions as an entity, and that's been one of the big revelations to me. We do a lot of, we're in kind of a tribal mindset in some respects these days, and there's a lot of polarization, and we all know about that. But for the most part, when I'm at the Capitol, for example, a lot of these things, they're not Democrat or Republican issues. They're not. They're not things that are so based on a litmus test. 95% of it, you can work your way through it if there's a will to do it. And it's interesting when I do the shows up there. A lot of times, if we're in the we're pre-recording stuff, there's sometimes a healthy time after the interview where Democrats and Republicans are having a private discussion about something as they're sitting there, trying to find a way through to the middle to fix something. And I really like to see that when I can. Most of the times they can on stuff, but that's one of the things to me that's really kind of special about having kind of an insider's opportunity to watch stuff. When you talk to a lawmaker from Southern Illinois or suburban Chicago about an issue like the underfunding of the Department of Children and Family Services and how children are falling through the safety net and ending up in horrific situations, sometimes dying, they all care about it. They all care about it. Now, they may come to the table from different positions on how to solve the problem, but they do want to fix it. And I think that's one of the things I hold out hope for when I take part in these discussions is to see how both sides of the aisle can and oftentimes do work together to fix things. It's pretty clear how the Republicans felt about the graduated income tax, pretty clear how most Democrats felt about it. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things they can work together on. And that's where I think the true hope is for this whole situation.
Well, that becomes its own interesting media sphere conversation, because the graduated income tax discussion and ultimately media machines from both sides. I can't remember the name of the billionaire gentleman that funded
Ken Griffin.
There you go. To J.B. Pritzker's funding on the one side, but the difference in infrastructure that each team was playing with, right? So I look at something like in Illinois policy or local government information services that are really, they purport to be news, but they are really more kind of propaganda outlets for their own particular side of the political spectrum, versus true hard reporting. So like they're able to introduce things into the conversation, into the media sphere that seem more credible than they may actually be.
Well, it's not new though.
Yeah.
Um, it feels new sometimes when you see groups get together from a particular point of view to make a case for or against, let's say, the graduated income tax or public employee pensions, things like that. But it's always been there. The the political viewpoints have been expressed by newspaper and other organizations since the 1800s in this country. So it's not a new thing. But as the number of media outlets declines to be on the ground at the Capitol, I think that it's even more important for folks to take a little deeper look, to try to dig a little deeper. Don't just have one thing you look at every day. Like I said a little earlier, I tried to read 6 or 7 different news sources a day on what's going on Illinois politics. It's all the major newspapers, the big stations, and of course Rich Miller's Capital Facts.
Oh, yeah.
That is a good source of information, and of course public media. So I still think there's a responsibility on the part of the individual citizen to do the most that they can to get the information at the end of the day about how they make their decisions on things, and to dig a little deeper when you see a spot that says one thing about one issue or another. Go back, take a look, Google where the money's coming from, and take it into consideration at the end of the day.
So let's talk a little about Rich Miller, because that's a fun one. So I know Devin. Now I'm gonna have to have Devin on the podcast. It's always fun going through these conversations, like the things just connect and build up and out. So because I worked at the Daily Egyptian for a semester in college, and in that time got to cross paths with him and have just stayed having a relationship with Devin, but didn't realize until later on, Rich and Devin being brothers, I had gotten to see Rich speak to a group of Model Illinois government students, and I mean, Rich,
I do
well enough, I'm sure. Just the being 20, 21 years old and seeing somebody get up and just be the best way I can phrase it is as real as Rich was about politics in Illinois, and just cut straight to the chase on it, looking out at a room of aspiring people that wanted to participate in politics at all different levels in Illinois and saying, here's the real stuff, man.
Yeah, and we're talking about a thing called capitalfacts.com. It's a kind of a daily hot sheet on what's going on in Illinois politics, and it started out as literally a fax that would come out every morning and go to.
So when did he start this? When did it first begin faxing?
He started this in the early '90s.
Okay.
He was started on the ground there in the early '90s, and it is one of the most credible sources of information about what goes on at the Capitol and in the political sphere in Illinois that you'll find. It's a subscription service, but he has a website, capitalfacts.com.
The comments are golden.
Right, where you can, the comments are extremely interesting every day. And there's some folks who have been, there are folks all over the state, right here in southern Illinois, all over the state, come from all kinds of backgrounds and levels of expertise, and they weigh in on stuff. And you can learn so much in a day's time just by reading the comments on the darn things,
Right.
to give you a really good sense of the lay of the land. But one of the things that I could say about Rich is he's one of the hardest working people I've ever seen in any profession. When it comes to working his sources are impeccable on both sides of the political aisle, and it's kind of the place to make your case one way or the other, or have your say on stuff. It's really, yeah, it's kind of a must-read thing when it comes to Illinois politics.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way that it's grown over the years with, live streaming and things like that, it really serves an important role.
No, and I hope he's doing something to build it to live beyond himself, right? I know he's had some really quality people come through the doors over the years. The person that stands out to me, because I had classes with him, was Barton. I can't
Barton
remember.
Lorimer. Mm-hmm.
How do you pronounce his last name? I can't.
Lorimer.
Lorimer. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you. I would have said Lorimer. So Lorimer's.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked to him in years, but I know he spent time in Springfield working for Rich, and has ascended in his positions in Illinois politics. And it's like, does he have somebody or a group of people? Because I mean, it would take 5 people to replace one Rich Miller.
Well, you'd have to ask Rich about that up close and personal. But he's had a number of folks over the years who have worked with him to get information to him. One of the ones that has done an especially good job has been Hannah Meisel, who's now working for Illinois Public Radio. I think she was with, I believe they called it the Daily Line, but she's been up there a number of years now, and she's got a really good foundation for her reporting. But yeah, the Capitol Facts thing it's something when you wake up in the morning, it's one of the things you go, oh, I did not know that. But, when we talked earlier about relationships, Rich has developed those over the last 30, going on 40 years up there. And he's got a credibility and a certain gravitas. And if, he plays it right down the middle when it comes to how things are playing themselves out.
I wish every state had a Capitol Facts
Yeah.
outlet.
Yeah.
I feel like the the level of accountability in state government would be different if every state had one of them.
Yeah, it's kind of for the political junkies out there amongst us. It's required reading every day, and in the days of the 24-hour news cycle, it's extremely valuable the way that he can plug things in from different live sources like Blue Room Stream and things like that that take you up right to where the event's happening, unfiltered. However it plays out that way, and you can see the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, and that's part of what has replaced kind of what we talked about in the abundance of reporting, people on the ground there, where technology has kind of filled in the gap, and I will never argue that it fully suffices for boots on the ground reporting. I mean, there's just nothing to replace somebody being able to really dig in for you and carry you through the process, because all too often, if it's just a media dump, right, if you've got to watch something firsthand and consume it in an hours long chunk, like somebody who may be reporting on it on hand is, you may not pull out the same context that you needed to, because it's difficult to keep track of that much media all at once.
Yeah, and that's where expertise like that's especially valuable, because he's been watching the stuff on the ground for 40 years, and that's the kind of experiences that you need. We were just watching this week as we speak that 2 of the longtime reporters for the State Journal-Register in Springfield have taken a buyout from their company to retire. Bernie Schoenberg and Doug Finke from the SJR. If you look at their time on the ground at the Capitol, it's probably close to 100 years of experience.
Gosh.
I don't want to date them or give away ages or anything, but they've been there for so many years, and their viewpoint or their perspective and experience from having watched this for literally decades on the ground, going back to, in this case, would have been the Thompson administration until now, and the changes in legislative leadership and the back and forth in terms of the majorities and how the state General Assembly is made up. Those kinds of perspectives are really, really valuable.
Well, I don't disagree, and it's part of some of this discussion and us having strong character in reporters like yourself in the Carbondale region. Like, part of this project is documenting this to know what true, earnest, capable reporting is. Like, people that have sunk their lives into this work and really found out what the right formula is to produce a product on the other end for people, and what type of positive influence that can have on communities throughout the state. So I just, the more you talk about these folks that are stepping away from this activity, it's like somebody's got to tell their story to inspire the next version of them that comes along, because we can't just let them go and not replace them at all.
Right, and I think you can't replace them individually because of their unique contributions and experiences. But I'm hopeful that their company fills the positions and gets people in there. Illinois is like the 5th largest economy in the country. When you look at Illinois, if it were a nation state, it would be at the United Nations. It's that big of an economy. It's that big of an influence in world affairs. It needs to be covered. And we've got something like 12.8 million people in this state who are affected by the decisions that are made there at the Capitol. And you need that kind of access and experience and viewpoint to cover this thing and to explain it and interpret it on a daily basis.
We're the type of state that really does resemble all of America, right? People often put too much in a single bucket based on what state they're in, but here we've got so much in the folks that live here that represents so much else about the entire United States, that when I remember around primary time when there was that chatter about, does Iowa need to be the first in the nation Democratic caucus and whatever else, and J.B. Pritzker was like, hey, we'll take these first in the nation votes. And it's like, that to me makes sense, because it's like the folks that find themselves on the right side of the political spectrum are a really good representation of the people on the right side of the political spectrum across the country. Same as with the folks that are on the left side of the political spectrum, right? And everybody in between. I feel like something about Illinois is just so clearly representative of the greater America that we don't do enough of selling that up as a state. And maybe we do, and I just don't take notice of it, but I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting place to cover, because you have the urban issues of Chicago, you have the suburban issues of suburban Cook County and the collar counties. You have, I don't like to use the term downstate. It's it's something that was started years ago, but
when did you first start hearing the phrase downstate?
1980, 81.
Okay.
And I got a kick out of how somebody once called Rockford downstate, and I'm like, last time I looked, it's north of Chicago, pretty much almost in Wisconsin. But if you look at Chicago as being a center of global commerce and influence, banking, finances, Chicago Board of Trade, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, all those things, and then you contrast that with rural and urban poverty issues that we have. You're right. This is it's kind of the American story, not in microcosm so much, but it's pretty. It's a good way of kind of looking at the rest of the United States from the prairie state perspective, because we are all of that and more.
Prairie state perspective. It's a good line. I really like that. It's spot on. The so did we at the very beginning, did we ever actually talk about specifically how you got from Metropolis to Paducah then to Carbondale? We should probably that's one
sure.
key component I like to get in the podcast, and we were talking about so much other good stuff I hadn't gotten on that.
I started out as a disc jockey when I was 15. I think I actually started kind of walking into the station when I was 14. It was a 1,000-watt daytimer in Metropolis, WMOK, AM station. So it would sign on at 6 o'clock, and whatever the local sunset time was, you signed the thing off. It would be as early as 4:45 in wintertime, and I think as late as 8:15 in the summer during daylight savings time. But I went to work there as a high school student, and my dad knew the morning disc jockey there, and I had expressed an interest in radio at the time. I was listening an awful lot in 1969, 1970, listening to a lot of rock and roll and stuff. And, I was listening to the big rock station locally at that time was WDXR in Paducah. And then at nighttime, when we would drive around, when gas was 29 cents a gallon, we would listen to WLS and all the famous rock jocks up there, and I thought that was really interesting. And I just kind of haphazardly mentioned it to my dad. Next thing I know, I'm out there on Saturday mornings learning how to run the board and shuffle discs and cue up tapes and all that stuff. And I was there through high school, and it was a great way to work your way through high school and college. Back in the day, service stations used to have somebody come out and gas your car.
Yeah.
This was more fun than doing that. Lots more fun. I would take requests from my classmates before I would go out to the radio station, and I'd play them. So
that took you. Did you go straight from Metropolis to Paducah, or was Paducah part of your time while you were here in Carbondale? I guess
both actually. It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
What happened was, in the fall of '73, I'd already graduated from high school, so I started going to Shawnee Community College at Olin, and about that time there was an opening at an AM/FM station in Paducah, WPAD, and then later on the FM side it was WDDJ, and I started working there in the fall of '73, working my way through community college, and it was really interesting the contrast between the places, because the first place was kind of antiquated in terms of the equipment and everything. And the station I went to in Paducah was all modernized, had the latest equipment and everything. So it was really a great place to learn. And I did everything from being a DJ. I would DJ on the country station from 6 to 11, then go over to the rock station and DJ from midnight to 2 o'clock. I'd go from Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty to Blue Oyster Cult, and it was an interesting place. We did a lot of stuff there. We did a lot of basketball and high school coverage, and you learned a lot about different technologies there, and that's how I sort of migrated into the news side of things in the late 70s. I had a course in news writing at SIU at the time. I was up here, started here as an undergraduate student, as a junior, and 1976, and wasn't originally interested in it, but since I had the news writing course, the news director quit right around Christmas of '78,
Huh.
and the gentleman who owned the radio station said, "Well, you've had some news writing. You want to try this?" And I'm like, "Sure, whatever."
Uh-huh.
And so I got into it, and my first day was I went to the mayor's news conference in Paducah, and I thought, well, I was going to come back with all this great tape I was going to edit and write all these stories. And I got back to the station just in time to find out that a young woman, teenage girl actually, had hijacked an Ozark Airlines DC-9 out of Louisville, Kentucky, I believe it was, and forced the plane down at Marion, Illinois, to try to free one of the inmates at the Marion Correctional Center, the Marion Federal Prison.
Wow.
And so I went from the mayor's news conference to covering something like breaking news. So I was calling all my friends back in Carbondale who worked at news stations to string reports, and it was a really interesting day. Fortunately, the whole thing worked out where no one got hurt. All the passengers got off the plane. The young person in question was safely disarmed, and everything went well. But I don't know that my life has ever slowed down since. In terms of covering breaking news, you never know what's going to happen. You go in the morning to, there's a dozen things on your lead sheet that you're going to work on. The city council is going to work on this tonight. You know that this thing's up in the General Assembly, and then the police scanner goes off. There's a fire, or somebody's robbed a bank, or there's a tornado warning, or something, and you do thrive on the adrenaline.
Yeah.
You do. Been a long time. Still kind of do. Yeah.
I imagine that it's kind of one of those things that once you get the taste of it, it's kind of hard to live without it, I imagine.
Well, people are, I think by our nature, we want to hear stories. We want to tell stories, and it's part of, part of being human is to try to be there first with the news about whatever's going on in your community or your family or whatever. And I've never lost an interest in it, and it's been really rewarding to work with young people over the years who are curious about the business, curious about the ethics, curious about the whole thing. And the great thing about it is they're always asking you questions about why do you do what you do. And so you never have the opportunity to take things for granted. You always have to ask yourself why you do what you do. And I think that's been really interesting over the years, is the opportunity to work with young people. And one of the things that's been really fun is as we do the Illinois Lawmakers Program at the Capitol, when we do the governor's budget message or the state of the state, we've got 5 or 6 SIU students there running cameras, they're running video switchers, they're running all that stuff for speech that's going to, 10 public TV stations across the state live, all the public radio stations, and those are college students doing something that, I don't know any program that does anything quite like this. And it's just an amazing thing to be in the middle of all that and watching these young people, getting their press passes from, the House Speaker's office, coming over, getting their press passes from the Secretary of State's office, all these things, and they're walking in, in their suits and their best professional attire, into this really astonishing place, with all the oak, the dark oak and all that, and the uh, the the huge monumental setting that is the Illinois House and the Illinois State House and everything, and they're doing such a great job, and they're so up after the thing that they can't believe what they've just done, and that's just really cool.
Do you have any old students that you live vicariously through because of an interesting position that they may hold somewhere?
Yeah, actually, there's one that's really kind of cool. Eric Boyer, who lives on the island of St. Martin's, travels all over the world doing sports and special events for NBC. He was a student back here in the 1980s, mid 1980s. Last time I saw him was for the coverage of the eclipse 2017, and Eric's stopped by after the event's over and everything. We're talking in the office, and he's got his iPad out, and he's showing me how he's running 2 FM stations in St. Martin's.
From his iPad.
From his iPad, yeah. Yeah. And, it's really fun seeing stuff like that. There's, I've got probably several dozen of these I could go into, but it's really fun seeing what they've done and how they learned so much while they were here at SIU Carbondale and where they've gone since then through their hard work, imagination, and intelligence. It's incredible to have been able to share part of the experience with them.
And I will say, Jack, that it's been a amazing experience getting to share this conversation with you. That has been episode 24 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. My guest, Jak Tichenor, with just so much wonderful knowledge and stories of what media has influenced statewide, but so much more importantly here in our little community in Carbondale. And if you've watched any of these podcasts so far, you know that my thing is media. Like it is what I love and adore, and to get to hear from somebody like Jak has just been an absolute honor. So as I always say, have a good one, whatever that one may be.